Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Heidi Horsley, and I'm here today with my co-host, our guest co-host, Doneley Meris. Hi, Doneley.
Hi.
So I am excited that Doneley is here. We've been working together for many years. I've known Doneley for many years. And my mom, Dr. Gloria, is on a trip with her fiancé, so Frank Powers, so they're gone. So Doneley stepped in, which I love. So welcome, Doneley.
Absolutely.
So before we start, I want to talk about Dr. Gloria's book. You know about it because you just saw her for a barbecue on your roof in New York City. So here it is. She wrote this with her fiancé, Frank Powers, The Secrets of Senior Dating, Open to Love. And please go out and get it. If you know anybody that wants to date as seniors, get the book. It's all about my mom's life and how she found hope after my father and love after my father died in 2020. And all proceeds go to the Open to Hope Foundation. So today, Doneley, we are going to talk about something that I know you have a lot of experience with, and it's children's grief.
That's right.
And we're going to talk about navigating children's grief. Before we do that, I just want to say that we are partnered with ADAC, which is the Association for Death Educators and Counselors at Open to Hope. And I also want to talk a little bit about your background. Now, I know you've worked with children in grief.
I started my career working with autistic and developmentally disabled children and their grief process, basically.
Okay.
Starting from leaving a state institution and going into a group home situation, how that transition happens for adolescents with disabilities.
Wow, that's interesting. That would be a big transition too, I imagine. I've also had experience working with children, and in fact, teach a class at Columbia called Traumatic Loss During Childhood, where I look at kids that have had traumatic losses and how it impacts them over their life course. So this will be an interesting show, and we have two other people here that are experts on this topic, Lindsey Whissel Fenton and Greg Adams. And we are going to be, like I said, talking about navigating children's grief.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hello, Greg and Lindsey.
Hello.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I think before we start, Doneley, I want to tell everybody a little bit about you, because you're my guest co-host. You are the founder and executive director of HIV Arts Network.
Yes. And
you were the director of bereavement services at the NYC LGBT Community Center. You've chaired both the HIV/AIDS and LGBT committees at ADAC. And you are an adjunct faculty member at New York University and Hunter College.
Right.
So again, thank you for being with us today.
Glad to be here.
It's glad to have you. So let's introduce our guests, and then we'll start with the questions. Let's start with Greg, because he's closest. So Greg Adams is a program coordinator for the Center for Good Mourning and staff bereavement support at Arkansas Children's Hospital. He is an adjunct professor at the University of Arkansas Little Rock, and he is the author of Adam Gets Back in the Game, a children's storybook about coping with grief and loss, which you can see right on the table by Doneley. I love the cover. And it's a great book about the loss of a friend, which I think is powerful, because we've talked a little bit before the show about, as Lindsey said, it's a disenfranchised loss.
That's right.
And you know, sometimes our friends are our chosen family, and they're very important in our lives. Greg is also an active volunteer with community and professional organizations, so welcome, Greg.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And next to Greg is Lindsey Whissel Fenton. Lindsey is an Emmy Award-winning filmmaker, international speaker, senior producer, and director at PBS affiliate WPSU. She is the creator of Speaking Grief and Learning Grief, which is a free online resource to help support kids navigating loss. She serves on the board of directors for the National Alliance for Children's Grief and is the founder of Empathic Media and host of the Apologies podcast. So welcome, Lindsey.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Okay, Doneley, so how do we want to start out today?
Well, both Greg and Lindsey worked with children, worked with grieving children, and let's just go with it. How do you do this? Different generations, you're adults and you're working with children. How do you process loss with children?
Well, I'm got to jump in and then correct anything I leave
Sure,
out
sounds good.
and make it sound better, Lindsey. But you know, I think about it as a few different things that are kind of fundamental that kids need. when they've had a major loss in their life, when an important person has died. One is they need good information. They need information that's at their level. They need really honest information so that we don't have to come back later and tell them, you know, we told you this, but actually this is what happened.
Right.
Because that just raises all kinds of other complications that are needed. And so the kids that need really good, honest, developmentally appropriate information that they can understand, I think they need support for that as they go, and places to be able to try to remember and think through and talk about what it's like, and make that transition from that person being in their life in a physical way to being in their life more in terms of memory, and support for that, and really an open communication for that, so that they can talk about the person, share about them, ask questions. And then as they get older, then we're going to need to adjust, because they're going to change, and we're going to need to adjust how we talk about it and adjust how we support them, and that's why keeping that door open is going to be important. And I think another fundamental thing they need is they need as much predictability in their life as possible. And so routine, things that they know. Some things have changed and some things didn't. You know, back when I used to work in the cancer world with children with cancer and their families, Mr. Rogers had a book that was called "Some Things Change, Some Things Stay the Same," and I thought that was such a great title and a theme for a lot of things, right? Some things are really different, and we need to help you understand what those are, but not everything is different.
That's right.
You know, because perhaps your school's the same, or other people in your family are still there, and being able to keep as many things that are important the same, and don't change anything that you don't have to change unless you really want to, and you think it's an important change, you know, as the adult and supporter for the child.
And Lindsey, what would you say about this?
I would say yes to everything that Greg just said, and I would also clarify that I always like to be clear, I'm not a practitioner myself. I am someone who has had the opportunity to work with some of the most amazing folks in the field across the country doing this work, so I'm happy to amplify everything I've learned from working with them. I would say I love what Greg was saying about age-appropriate information, and one of the most salient, valuable things I've learned in working with children came from a practitioner named Christina Cipriano, who is now at Dougie Center, and she said, always remember that children will not ask you the questions they don't want to hear the answers to, or they're not ready to hear the answers to. So really letting the child guide the conversation, giving an honest, direct, age-appropriate response to their questions, then pausing, and if they're ready for more, they'll ask more questions. If not, they might go and then come back at a later time. I would also say normalizing the grief experience, and I think we can do a lot of that through our own behavior. So I've been in personal situations where I've heard people say, oh, you know, just don't cry in front of the kids, be strong in front of the kids. And again, we don't want to turn our kids into needing to support us, but I think being open about your grief experience, especially if it's a loss that affects the family, you know, I'm crying because I'm sad and I miss daddy or whoever it is that has died, and also normalizing some of the other big feelings that come with grief. As we know, anger is a big part of grief, so I think it's also good to make that normal. You know, I'm feeling really angry and I'm not sure why, you know, that way it opens the door for the child to also be able to feel and express their feelings, and gives a safe container and a modeling for that to happen.
And with that in mind, I'm thinking about Greg's personal loss, because I know that your wife was pregnant and lost the pregnancy, right? And lost the baby? And you had a child.
She was 3 at the time.
She was 3 at the time. And then you had a child subsequently after that, right?
Yes.
How did you talk to your children about this loss?
Yes. For that one, for our 3-year-old, or our daughter, and so she knew that we were expecting a child, and we got a diagnosis in mid-pregnancy that our child had anencephaly, which meant that he had no brain, would develop a brain. So we chose to induce labor at that point, since that child's life would not be viable. And so I remember when we went to the hospital, you know, we told our daughter that the baby was sick, and that we needed to go to the hospital to get the baby out. with the anticipation that when we got home, we would need to tell her that the baby was so sick that he died.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but we felt like that was something that she could understand.
Mm-hmm.
And then as time went on, we tried to help her understand, that when somebody dies, that somebody, that they stay dead. And I remember one time in the car with her, she had some money in her hand, a coin, and I said, Laura, what do you got? She said, I got some money. I said, what are you going to do with that money? And she said, I'm going to give it to the baby when he stops dying.
Wow.
And so you could see that was a hard concept for her to get, that you don't die and then you get better,
Right.
But that's something that happens, and that's part of what it means to die, is that you don't get better and continue to live.
Well, and I'm also wondering, you talked earlier before the show about how your father-in-law died by suicide.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
How old were your children when that happened?
So that was before they were born.
Okay.
And so what would happen is that when they were born, and we would look at family pictures, and we would say, and this was your papa, which was the name that he had in the family, and he died before you were born. And then both of them, when they were 4, wanted to know how he died. Now before they were 4, our daughter, when she was 3, I remember, she doesn't remember this, but my wife and I certainly do, we were in the car, and out of the blue she said, so when Papa died, was he sick or was he sad? And we said, he was sad. And that's all she asked, and that's all we said, very much to what, your point, Lindsay, we felt like that's what, but when she was 4 and when my son was 4, they both wanted to know how, and so we told them that he was very sad and upset, and what was good to do when you're very sad and upset, and is to talk to somebody to get some help, but he was so upset that he didn't do that, and he thought it'd be better to die, and he caused himself to die. And then they wanted to know how, and we said that he shot himself, and then it became something that we could talk about. And we didn't, as we could talk about how much we missed him and how much we wished he was here, and as I got older, how much we were disappointed that he wasn't here and that he went through that. But then it was never a taboo thing then in the family, and that was a great relief for us. And I think it was helpful to them.
I like that, and I like that earlier you said, and there, if that happens, there's people you can talk to, there's things you can do, like
Yes.
weaving some education into. I love how you were candid, because some people don't talk about it.
No, it's true, and give my wife a lot of credit for that, because she was put on the spot for that. I'll tell you just a quick story. So when our son was 4, and if you're around many 4-year-olds, they have to say things out loud and process things. So he and I were at the grocery store, and we were checking out, and he starts talking to the clerk checking us out. And he said, my papa died. He killed himself. He was sad. You're supposed to talk to people, but he didn't talk to people.
I love this.
And she was just like, get me out of here, get these groceries too. But he was fine.
Yeah.
He was just doing what he needed to do, which was talk about it out loud.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right.
And and that's what we wanted them.
He was modeling
to do.
really amazing behavior. Lindsay's shaking her head, so I know there's a lot coming up for her in this.
I was just going to say, I love your use of the D words, dying, died in these conversations with your kids, because I know
Absolutely.
that's something we see a lot, is that people try to spare children by using euphemisms, and we know that children are very concrete in their thinking, and then that can actually exacerbate the experience, because you'll have children, we lost grandpa, who are going out and finding them, or waiting. I've heard of stories of kids waiting by the door, waiting for someone to come home. So being very concrete, so-and-so died. When we die, our bodies stop working, we don't come back. And people feel like that's harsh, but it's necessary, and also you're making it then okay to have those conversations. And just to the point of the clerk, I would say too, I was doing another interview where somebody asked me why kids struggle with grief. I said, I actually think kids probably do grief better than we do, because they haven't learned to repress their emotions. They're very pure in their expressions. And then when we start doing that as adults, where we're like, I'm just going to keep swiping, I don't want to talk about this. This kid is talking about not just death, but suicide. they pick up on that. So I think really normalizing it in our own behavior, and I think this work actually starts before there is a loss, with normalizing emotions and normalizing asking questions, having open conversations, and just trying to be mindful of those messages we might be conveying that we don't even realize that we are.
Yeah. Just to add, because this has happened a lot for me over the years, so I'll get calls sometimes from parents, most often moms, and somebody has died and their child is 3-4 years old, and they're struggling, and we'll talk about it on the phone, and I'll ask them at some point, I'll say, that's a hard thing to explain to a child. How did you tell them about it? And not infrequently they will say, well, I didn't tell them they died. I just told them they went to heaven. And then we'll talk about it some more, and we end up having that conversation that part of helping the child is understanding that they died, because understandably they might be wondering, well, if they went somewhere, why can't they come back?
Right, exactly.
Or why can't we go visit them? Because that's totally age appropriate.
Right.
And it's even hard for us as adults to have that idea that they're dead here but alive in another way. I mean, that's a...
Or when people say they're in a better place, then children are like,
Yeah,
well, I
exactly.
thought they
Right.
were in a good place with me. Why aren't they back here?
Or, I remember when my grandfather died, he was my grandma's second husband, my papa. I was maybe 4 or 5, and I remember to this day being with my dad, him carrying me at the hospital, and I said, well, where's Papa? And he just kind of paused and he goes, he's up there. And my first question, of course, as a 4-year-old was like, well, can't we go see him?
Yeah.
And I don't remember what followed that, but I do
Exactly,
remember
Right.
I just remember the point of being so confused, like, why is everyone so sad? Let's go upstairs. There's stairs right there.
And Lindsey, you also said it's important to say the word dead and death and die, because if you say that somebody's lost, oh, I lost somebody, then kids think, well, why don't we go find them?
Yeah.
Right.
It's like,
We had a 5-year-old whose sister died at the hospital years ago, and she was 3, and the family was doing a very supportive thing that let him come and see her after she died. And then several family members said, but remember, she's not here, she's gone. And several people said that, and eventually he said, she's not gone, she's right here. And again, it was being very literal and concrete, just like he was supposed to be. He was fine.
right.
Well,
That's
and
right.
it also just leaves, I think, interpretation open. We recently launched a new project called Learning Grief that I would love to talk more about, but in that launch, we did a webinar with Julie Caplow and a number of other people, but who's an amazing practitioner and trauma and grief expert in the field of children's grief, and she shared a story in a family where what they had said to the child was, he was just too good for this world, I forget who it was that died. And so then the child started acting out and having behavior issues because of fear. And it was like, well, if I don't want to be too good, if that's what happens when you're too good, you die. So I think we think we're softening it, but we're actually just introducing a lot more confusion and potential for struggle.
Right. Are there any differences, different approaches to working with children whose family members died, as opposed to a schoolmate or a friend who's not a family relative?
I think there's different issues that come up because children's lives change differently. The most common death we see in our grief support group programs is the death of a parent. And, for some of them, it was a parent who they didn't live with, but it was still important to them. But some of them, it was their primary parent and the person who took care of them. And so that really changes their life in a different way. And so I think that every loss ends up being fairly unique in that regard. It's the nature of that relationship and the role that person played in their life, and how their life is going to be different because of that. If it was their best friend at school, then who is going to be their friend now? And who they're going to go to. If it was the person who drove them to school, then who's going to do that? And if it was their grandparent that they saw at the holiday and they don't go to their house anymore, what's it going to be like? And so there's different, I think, impacts depending on the nature of that relationship.
I think if I could also just, a lot of something we're doing on learning grief, and I've seen a lot changing in the field, and actually even in workplace bereavement policies, is really broadening our understanding of family, because I think that can also be a problematic situation when we make assumptions based on biology, where in certain communities, for example, we've written some on learning grief about in African American communities where extended families play a different role than they might in other communities, or with LGBTQIA youth, the idea of found family. So to me, you know, to someone, their cousin might be someone they see twice a year, and in another person, their cousin is their brother. And then the friend down the street is their cousin, or just different constructs of family that I think when we get too tied to what the relationship was, and then likewise someone could have a family member die that they had a very difficult or challenging relationship with, or just lacked a strong relationship at all with that person. So I think with all things grief, just watching our assumptions when we come to those interactions and letting the person tell you what this loss means to them, rather than having an idea of, well, this is what I would assume it means to you, or what I think it would mean to me if I were in the similar situation, because we all come to everything with our own lenses. So just staying really curious.
Yeah, thank you. I think that the nature of how the death happened can really change the person's experience too. With how much it was anticipated or not anticipated. You know, if there's feelings of responsibility that might be there, you know, can be there too. And which is another reason why I think that which is even harder for many of us, you know, caregivers and parents, is to talk about somebody if somebody is likely to die or expected to die, to have that conversation beforehand, so that, again, it's a predictability piece. It's it's a hard conversation, but it's a safer world if you know what's coming than something that happens totally unexpected.
Right.
So we only have a few minutes, but I've got a question that is on a lot of parents' minds that I work with. And what it is how do I get my child to talk about the death? They're not talking about it, and I'm concerned. So is there any advice or words of wisdom you can give parents out there that are wondering how they can get their child to open up more?
Yeah. I'm glad to throw in, but I've been going first.
Oh, it's okay. I would just say, first of all, they may be talking about it in the way that they talk. So we know that play is the language of children, and children tend to be, especially young children, are very physical, especially in their grief responses. They take time to process things. So parents will share news, their kids will go play, and we think either, oh, they're fine because they're going and they're playing, or wow, they're not dealing with this, they're not grieving. That's how they're making sense of it. And then they may get really sad for a moment and then go back to playing, or then they may come back and want to talk about it. I would also say, again, with learning grief, we did some great videos with teens, and they were saying, you know, especially with the teen, they may be more comfortable talking to their peers. So I would say also, I understand the urge to want them to talk to you, but understanding that they may find comfort, they may be talking more than we realize, is what I would say, or they may be expressing it, just not through spoken language.
Right.
Thank you. I agree with all that, and so to support that, I would add too that I think that for those caring parents, you know, who feel really so frustrated and concerned, you know, for their kids who are quiet, I think that that we can look for small ways to role model and set an example of talking about somebody. That doesn't have to be a big conversation. That doesn't as intimidating. So it might be something like, oh, you know, we're going to the pool. Man, your brother loved to go to the pool. I always think about your brother when you go to the pool, and that's all you say. And I mean, but you're modeling that we can bring it up. Doesn't have to be a big emotional, long drawn out thing, but you're practicing. You know, your grandfather would have been so proud of you tonight, and then leaving it like that. And you know, but saying things, or I was really missing your dad today, and I was thinking about him. And maybe even at some point, you know, you could say, you know, I don't know if you ever have those kind of days, or you ever have those, you know, but it doesn't have to be a big thing. But I think we can model and role model that. We had a little girl years ago, and her brother had died, and she was playing with his video games, and then she started to cry, and her parents did a beautiful job supporting her and said, you know, you can talk about him anytime. And her parents shared with me that she turned to them and said, I didn't think I was supposed to because you all never do.
Wow,
And I think that kids watch us, and we can, it doesn't mean it would always happen, but but they pay a lot of attention to what,
Yeah.
to what we do.
So modeling, adults modeling for the child is
Yes.
an important thing. Yeah.
So where do we all find you? We've got to wrap up right now. Lindsay?
Well, on the subject of modeling, that's perfect. So I've been alluding to Learning Grief. That's a new initiative the WPSU launched, funded by Imagine Learning Foundation. It's a sister initiative to our project Speaking Grief, and it really seeks to help adults, help kids and teens learn to navigate loss by things like modeling. So we break down some of the fundamental skills that people can start implementing in their lives, and also coaching those skills in the young people, and not just if you're a parent, but if you are a coach, an educator, an older sibling, whatever that role may be. So that's at learninggrief.org. Speakinggrief.org is another one of our projects. And then me personally is lindseywisselfenton.com.
Great, thanks, Lindsay. And Greg?
Yeah, the program I work with, we have a part of the Arkansas Children's Hospital website, and you can find it by going to goodmourningcenter.org, and that's mourning with a U, MOURNING, and we have grief and loss resources and information, and a free grief and loss electronic newsletter that comes out quarterly, and recommended books and other things that might be helpful.
Great,
That's great.
thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
It's been great. Doneley, that was a great show.
Wonderful.
And
Indeed.
so important, because so many people wonder, how do we help our kids? So I guess we'll end now. And we always like to end and say, if you've lost hope, please lean on ours, mine and Doneley's, and Greg's and Lindsay's, until you find your own, and God bless.
You don't need enough hope to get through the day. You don't need enough hope to get through a year. You just need enough hope to get through the next moment.
Even though we had this thing happen to us, it also happened for us.
We hold the memories of those that we cared for, that were a part in the making of our characters. And when they pass, those memories will come back when you need them. They become voices of intuition and of guidance.
We want to be a lifeline for somebody else. We want to inspire others and say, we know what it's like to be where you are, but you're not always going to be there. Just take our hand, believe us. We'll take the journey with you.
When life presents 1,000 reasons to mourn, show life that you have 1,001 reasons to smile.
We get through this one breath at a time. We don't do it a day at a time. That's healing. That's positive, and that's what the world wants to talk about.
People die. Love doesn't die.
We always say, if you've lost hope, please lean on ours.